This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify POS has everything you need to sell in person. Go to shopify.com/system, all lowercase, to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/system.
Hello, this is Raising Me, and it's where we connect with the experts on the things so many of us are experiencing as parents. I'm Adrienne Stein, mom of 3 and a longtime journalist. Today, we are talking about overscheduled kids. Not only what that means for them, but what that means for us, and trying to find a better balance in all of it. You know the feeling, right? Like, kids need to be here for this lesson, there for that practice. Plus, there are the games on the weekends. Maybe there are the after-school clubs, too. It can be so exhausting, not only for the kids, but for us. So here's the reality. So often we're doing this to ourselves. I mean, who hasn't felt some guilt saying no or not being able to participate in something? And it's understandable, right? We're trying to create every opportunity for our kids or give them a life that maybe we didn't have. Rebecca Hoffmann is here. She's a longtime family therapist. She's also a mom trying to figure this all out too. And she is the director of MaineHealth Center for Trauma, Resilience, and Innovation. We start out with recognizing the signs to watch out for. And boy, I'm telling you, there are so many great takeaways for all of us in this conversation. Check it out. Rebecca, love having you with us because you're just a wealth of information. And overscheduling kids, let's just talk about it, because we hear about, oh, kids today are so overscheduled. But how do we really quantify that? What does it mean to be overscheduled as a kid? What does that look like?
That is a great question, and there is not some perfect algorithm because so much of it depends on a child's personality and how well they handle a schedule, what they need for downtime, or whether they really prosper by being busy. So just like us as adults, some of us know that we really need a certain amount of time, of relaxation time, let's say. It's the same for kids.
How do we know, though, if, our child is overscheduled versus just being in a lot of activities that are great, enriching activities that they enjoy? Like, how do you tell the difference?
Great question. Here are a couple things to think about as a parent. Is your child seeming to fall apart a lot? Are they anxious a lot? Are they struggling with getting things completed, like schoolwork, for example? If they go to school and then they have activities until 8 p.m. and they eat dinner and they don't have time for schoolwork, that's a sign that it's probably, even though they might not recognize it, that might be too much for them. So it's really the first steps of teaching your kids about balance, but you're only going to see that through their behavior and, what you're seeing and hearing from them. They may not ever say, Mom, this is too much.
Right, I'm overscheduled, Mom or Dad or whoever it is. Yeah, they may not have the language around it, but it really is, as parents, plugging in to figure out what those signs are. Emotionally and physically, are there things to look for our kids?
Yes, emotionally and physically. So physically, are they getting enough sleep? Sleep is so critical to a child's brain development.
As in, if they're overscheduled, they may not get enough?
They may not get enough sleep. So,
okay.
So, and really very concretely, if they're getting home at 8 p.m., they're eating dinner at 8 p.m., and starting homework, or even starting that really critical downtime, which is really important to them, and their bedtime is creeping later, or let's say they have swimming or hockey at 4 in the morning or 5 in the morning, that sleep time for children, any pediatrician would say this, is when the brain develops the most for a child. So guarding that is so important. So physically, if they're over exhausted, if they're getting a lot of physical injuries, let's say, I mean, that's often common in sports, but if they have lingering physical injuries because their body doesn't have enough downtime to heal, that might be a sign. In terms of the emotional, that's probably where people would see it the most. Children that are falling apart a lot.
And what does that look like?
That looks like just crying or behaviorally sort of acting out, not wanting to do things, pushing back. That can be a sign of exhaustion, as we all know as parents, but it can also be a sign they're telling you something, right? They're telling you, I can't go do this other thing right now. I'm tired, or it's just too much for my brain, or so you're going to potentially see behaviorally some acting out, some pushing back. One of the other big ones is anxiety. So the more kids have on our plate, just like adults, the more we have on our plate, the more pressure is on us. And kids are going to feel that pressure. And that can increase their anxiety, which we already know is an epidemic, right? Mm-hmm. Childhood anxiety. You and I have talked about that. Part of that anxiety is that we are scheduling our kids a lot more than, let's say, you and I were scheduled as kids. We did one sport, right?
Right. A ballet class for a session.
Exactly.
And then we've taken ballet. You're good to go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It wasn't like travel soccer and club soccer.
Oh
and
my
school.
gosh, it's crazy.
Right. And there are benefits too, but I'm definitely not indicating it's all bad. But if you're seeing your child emotionally having a hard time on a regular basis, it's a flag that something's going on for them.
As we're talking about this too, on the flip side, is there such a thing as underscheduled kids, like where they don't have enough to do? And how would the signs, symptoms, and identifying that be different?
Sure. So that's an very interesting question.
Because I will say, our son doesn't have enough to do this winter. We need to find things.
Right. Sign him up for something.
Sign him up for just something.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So some questions sort of to answer your question I would want to ask myself as a parent is my children being introduced to a variety of activities to maybe find something that interests them, right? So if a child doesn't try rock climbing, they're never going to know if they like rock climbing. Or if my child, likes soccer and wants to continue soccer at, greater levels, if I don't give him or her those opportunities, they're never going to have the opportunity to find that out. There's a balance between saying, okay, am I introducing enough enrichment, after school enrichment for my child so that they can see that it's a big world out there and there are so many opportunities. And also activities do teach kids about scheduling and balance, and it teaches them what is too much and not enough. The biggest concern, and I'm sure any parent would feel this, is what are they doing when they're underscheduled, quote unquote underscheduled. If your child is coming home and they're heading outside with their neighborhood friends and they're climbing trees and they're playing baseball and they're running around, beautiful, right? If they're coming home and they're sitting down to technology, that is a different story. I really want to be careful not to dive completely into the tech question because that's a whole other podcast. But what I will say is that being on technology, being on a phone is not relaxation. It is not downtime. Mm-hmm. And that's true for adults too. So when we say, okay, I have an hour tonight to just be, and so we jump on our phones and social media, we aren't relaxing, we're distracting. And that's true for kids too. It's not relaxation, it's distraction from just being. And learning how to just be is really important.
A skill not many of us have anymore. Like, let's be real, but just say that again, distraction, not
relaxation.
Wow.
So,
so true.
Yeah. So if you think about it, you hear people say, it's good for kids to be bored because then they have to come up with the drive to do things themselves. That's important. But I know as an adult, sometimes we move so quickly that when you sit down, it's hard to just be, but your brain and your body need to what we call rest and digest. So that's the just being. And kids need to do that too.
What do you think is the root cause of the overscheduling craze of today? Is this, societal? Is it just the nature of just being more competitive? Why, as parents, do we feel pressure often to make sure our kids are in this activity and that activity and going at a certain level?
There are a number of reasons why it could be. One could be, and I think this is a big one, is that we want our kids to succeed, right? We want our kids to excel and feel good at things and be able to continue doing them at a higher level. And so in order for that to happen, they need to do a lot of that activity to get good enough, because a lot of kids are doing the same activity. Only some of them are going to, be able to excel. And so what parents do to solve that is more, right? Like not just soccer in the fall, soccer year round. That's great. If your kid loves soccer and they want to do it and they are feeling like it's a important part of their life, but it's important as a parent to ask why. Why am I doing this? Is it because it's good for my kid or because I want my kid to be the best at this? So there is sometimes a thing in all of us parents where we are kind of living out our lives through our kids, right? That's really real.
Of course.
And so really looking into why am I doing this? Why am I scheduling my child in multiple sports at the same time? And I'll give you an example. My older son loves football and has fallen in love with baseball. And he wants to do both. They offer both right now, and the schedule works. And so he and I had to sit down and talk about, okay, this is what your days are going to look like. How is that going to feel when you're actually in those days? And what are the signs going to be that it's too much? And then what would we do? So we really made a plan for having him learn to look inward and be able to look at the signs that, okay, this is too much for me or not. And, that it's great for him. So I think it really is an opportunity to teach kids to learn in themselves how much balance they need.
Some self-reflection. And how great that's a great takeaway for parents is, when you're looking at the schedule and going, oh, this is going to be a lot, to sit down with your son or daughter and say, okay, let's visualize what your day looks like here, because you've got school for this long, you've got homework here, you've got after school practice, plus on Tuesday and Wednesdays, you're going to drive 30 minutes to go to whatever that is, and having them think in advance of, okay, so how is that going to feel when you visualize that? And to that point, so your son loves football and baseball. Those are two activities that he wants to participate in. But how do we know when our child is doing something because they feel pressured to versus they really enjoy it?
That's a great question. It's a conversation. When the registration opens up, which unfortunately is often so far in advance, they'll say, yeah, I want to do that.
I'll do it. Yeah.
And then they get to the season and they're like, wait, I have a child that's like, what? You didn't ask me. Why'd you sign me up for that? And I say,
I have that same child. Yes.
And I say, remember we had this conversation 3 months ago? So if there is a lot of pushback from that child, it may be for a variety of reasons, but it's about having those conversations. Why? Why don't you want to do this? Are you nervous about it? And if that's the case, maybe it's a good thing for them to do it, right? To push their distress tolerance. Or are they feeling exhausted and they just need downtime? So really learning to have those conversations with your kids and also modeling it yourself, right? If your child sees you running, never sitting down and relaxing, or when you do, it's on the phone or on the laptop, that's sending a message about how they should perform in life. as well.
Well, that's some self-reflection right there. Yeah. Yep. I'm thinking about that one for sure. I also wonder, like, are there long-term effects to being constantly overscheduled as a kid?
Yes.
Or what does that look like?
So that looks like, again, kids are learning that this is the speed I'm supposed to operate at.
Okay.
And they may not learn how to operate at a more balanced speed. And so if they're going through all of their childhood and it's not working for them, they have anxiety, they have pressure. How, as an adult, are they going to learn to slow down if they've never done it before?
They're not.
It's
It's going to be a very long process, probably with some therapy.
Right, with some falls,
right.
Some breakdowns in functioning, right? So sometimes you see, and people see this all the time, a child that's been playing, 4 seasons of a sport, and then in 10th grade they're just done. Right? They just leave the sport, burnout, done. And that's a child that potentially could have benefited from a little more balance, or learning how to have that rest and digest downtime, learning how to just be. And our bodies absolutely need that as adults too.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify POS has everything you need to sell in person. Go to shopify.com/system, all lowercase, to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/system.
So, how does constant overscheduling impact how a child learns how to enjoy this downtime that we keep saying, we know is important, but how do they get to that point if they are constantly on the go? And how do we help them, obviously, as parents? Obviously, it starts with stop scheduling so much, but if we're already in it, how does this overscheduling impact kids' ability to just sit and play or sit and just be?
What I would say is, we have to teach it to them, and we have to do it by obviously not only modeling it, but starting to carve it out for them. For example, looking at your family values and saying, I really value eating dinner together as a family. And so if you've got 4 kids and they're in different sports and you're never together as a family, then there might be a reason to rethink the schedule so that you can come together even a few days a week and sit together and eat as a family and just be at the dinner table, right? No phones, conversation. That's teaching your kids and learning ourselves how to settle and just sit, right? I mean, you're eating, so you're doing something. So it's small doses of it. Or in the summer, having some of those weeks where you don't have a child overscheduled. Let's say they have no camp. If, you have the capacity to do that as a parent, and really letting them just figure out. And often it's uncomfortable for them, right? They don't know what to do, but figure out how to keep busy, how to not be bored without just jumping on an iPad all day or whatever it might be. So it's little doses of downtime, which to them is going to be, Mom, I'm bored. Mom, I'm bored.
What do you say to that?
It's good to be bored, right? Find something to do, right?
And not jump in as cruise ship director, because that is, I tend to do that. I mean, a little, honestly, especially with the little ones. I mean, now that my 2 oldest are a little bit older, it's like, well, just, you'll figure it out. But with the little ones in particular, like, I end up, well, let's think about this. Like, what can we do? Or finding an activity. But you're saying, figure it out, no matter their age.
Well, what I'd say is you're teaching something beautiful to them, which is that we as a family are going to figure out something fun to do together. You're not necessarily saying, I'm going to put you in 4 soccer camps in 1 week and run you around. You're saying, let's figure it out together. And that seems to be a value for your family, and that's really important. And letting them figure out some of their own time too is not going to be fun for them. They're going to be distressed because they're used to having, a lot of that figured out for them. But it is good for them to do
I think
that.
it's good for parents too, because there are definitely weekends by the end of the weekend. I'm like, I am not the cruise ship director. For the love of Pete, give me 10 minutes to sit here and read a book. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
So, I think it's beneficial for both kids and adults. What about parents who, they're hearing this and they know it, but still feel conflicted about pulling back on some of these activities? For one, it's a big investment. And two, maybe their kids do enjoy it, but from a mental and emotional place, they really need to cut back some of these activities.
That's a really, really tough question.
Yeah.
And I know you and I are probably both feeling it inside our guts right now because we all want our kids to excel. And that looks different than it did when I was a child. So if excelling means that they have to do a sport year round or multiple sports year round, that's a real, personal decision about saying, I'm not going to compete with the families that, or the kids that are in a sport year round, even though my child is going to walk into, middle school tryouts, having not played soccer all year, having just played in the fall and being okay with that.
Yeah, you have to be able to let go of the guilt you feel and internalize yourself.
Right. And we have to remember too that this is an issue of equity. There's many families that don't have the option to pay for their children to be in multiple activities year round. And so it really is an issue that it's creating more inequity for kids when some are getting a lot more access to a sport than others are. And as a parent, that I think about that, right? I think about that I want my children to not be good at things only because they've had more opportunity to do it. I want them to understand that that is a privilege and a benefit potentially that not all children have. And when we do that to our kids and we overschedule them, if it's from a place of competition where we want our kids to be the best, we have to understand that there are going to be kids around them that don't have that benefit and they don't have the privilege of that. And it's creating more inequity. It's broadening the divide.
So do you have, conversations with your child to say, look, we are going to play soccer this winter throughout the entire year or whatever, and say, this is a privilege. We are giving you a gift to be able to, so that they understand. Is that a fair conversation to have with the kids?
I absolutely do think it is, because if they don't know that what they're doing is costing money and that you are investing in
time,
exactly, then they don't really necessarily appreciate the opportunity they're being given. I always tell my kids, if they want to do something, like this is the cost for that, and I want to do this for you, but I also want you to take it seriously and really value it, so that in a month they're not like, oh, I guess I don't want to do that anymore.
We're done here.
Right.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
So great. And then meanwhile, the $500 later, you're like, oh my gosh.
Yes.
Does overscheduling impact younger kids than it would, say, teenagers?
Yes. So I think teenagers are more naturally, they have more things in their life, and developmentally they're able to manage more in their life. So it is sort of a natural progression for teenagers to be able to handle, let's say, drama practice and cheerleading or whatever it may be. Whereas younger kids, their play is how they interact with the world. Play is the most important part of a young child's life socially. So what I would say is that, and this is really just coming from the family therapist in me, is that if a child has the opportunity to play with friends versus start a sport at 4 years old, I think that the playing with friends is probably more beneficial to them, although they are interacting with kids and playing in soccer.
Though it's structured versus going outside, playing with sticks, making a fort, whatever it would be.
Right, using their imagination.
The creative side of their brain.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So how can we as parents, encourage open communication with our kids when, to make sure that they feel like they're in a safe place to say, look, I am way too busy. I am stressed out.
The way to model that is really to ask the questions. You hear me say this often is asking our child open-ended questions. How are you enjoying this? Are you feeling like you have enough downtime? Helping them even understand what downtime means and that it's actually a really important part of the day. It's not just if you have some extra time, read a book. It's really important to our brains and bodies to reset. And we need to teach our kids that is important, or they face the risk of burning out, right? Or, some other difficult emotional challenge in their lives. And so by asking questions, having them learn to self-reflect on how they're doing and how they're feeling, not just from a place of, I don't want to lose ground on this, but how am I feeling? Am I tired all the time? Am I getting enough sleep? Am I missing family time? Because those kids are often missing time at home that, let's say, a sibling is getting. And so really teaching your kids to self-reflect on what it's like to have the schedule that they have.
Making sure that it's part of the conversation. I mean, that's the thing. Like, so often I feel like we're on a hamster wheel as parents running through the week between school and practice for this child, and then that child has this and all the things, like pausing to put language and to all the feelings that you could be feeling. And to your point too, like about this downtime, it's harder than ever. I'm thinking about teenagers and my daughter and her friends and all the things, like they have so much going on. And to your point about that scrolling is not relaxing. They are on their phones. Now, granted, they're texting each other, they're FaceTiming each other, but the phones are so rarely put into another room and then just sit and read, sit and be quiet. So it feels like it's going to be even harder for the next generations to really prioritize that true downtime.
Yes. I think we're heading in the wrong direction in our society with that. There are so many great opportunities out there. It's hard to say no to all these cool things going on. Valuing or creating equal weight with downtime and activities is one way to look at it. Like, okay, there are these many activities going on. How am I helping my child have downtime or learn downtime? Or how, as a family, are we showing that it's important to rest? And like asking ourselves the question, like, what would it be like as a family to put our phones in a basket by the door when we walk in the door at night and leave them there? I know as an adult, I start panicking.
I'm sorry, what?
Yeah.
What kind of plan is
and
this?
I'm not necessarily saying that that's the answer, but really asking those
lovely.
questions, right? Like, how are we teaching our kids that downtime is important, and how do we feel about it?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, no, it does take effort from the parent. Like, we have to be intentional about putting our phone away. It is so easy while you're making dinner to be like, oh, I'm just going to check my work email one more time. I saw somebody on Instagram, check Instagram scroll while you're sitting there and you're making dinner, whatever it is, like to be able to put our phones away too and step back. And it goes back to that modeling.
Exactly.
So important. If there was one takeaway, well, gosh, that's hard because I feel like we've had a million. But if there was one takeaway today that we could do when it comes to, evaluating whether our kids are overscheduled or we already know they are, what should that be?
I think the one takeaway is self-reflection and family reflection. So really thinking about, what am I teaching my kids by scheduling? How are they doing with this? Is it good for them? Some kids do better the busier they are, right? So it's very much individual personality based. And how as a family what do we value as a family? And are we really showing our kids that? And again, it's very personal and different for every family, but really I think it's about self-reflection and teaching self-reflection to kids.
Scheduling doesn't have to all be bad, too.
Right, exactly. As you said, some children do better the busier they are, and some adults, right? If some people have a lot of downtime, they tend to procrastinate the things they have to do, or, whatever it might be. Each person is very different. But what I would say, and again, this is probably a takeaway too, is that activities are incredibly important for kids and for adults, but really for kids, they are learning so much from the activities they do. And downtime is also incredibly important. So are we fitting that into their lives as well?
It doesn't have to be an either or.
Right.
Really finding that balance. Rebecca, balance, it always comes back to balance, doesn't it? Really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. And I want to mention, too, we will have more resources on this on WGME.com/raisingme. Always a pleasure, Rebecca.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Boy, so many good things to think about with this conversation. And you know what stayed top of mind for me in talking with Rebecca is just this idea of giving ourselves a little bit of grace, permission to just chill out with all the stuff and all the things. I feel like we're constantly running on that hamster wheel, trying to create the best possible life for the kids, giving them every opportunity that we can. And, on top of that, look, it is so much more competitive now, sports, academics, all of it. So there is that added pressure. But if we just stop and ask why we're feeling that pressure to make sure our kids are doing a little or really a lot of everything, is it the kids that are really enjoying it? Or is it us feeling like we need to do this? I thought great advice to mentally walk through what the day actually looks like too. Like when all the things that you sign up for in the summer, then start in the fall. Really walking through that. Okay, this was a big one. Modeling behavior of being okay, just being. I'm telling you, that sometimes feels like a luxury based on where we are as a family today. But yikes, if we're always on the go, that is sending a message to our kids, and that really hit me. If they spend their whole childhood as go, 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 this activity, that activity, how are they going to learn to balance it all as adults? So maybe, as Rebecca talked about, just like letting go of some of that guilt, not always easy. I know we don't want our kids to miss out on anything, right? But it is okay to say no, even just for now, for our own mental health. Finally, underlined point here, technology is not relaxation, it's distraction. Again, going back to that being okay, just being. I thought that was such a great line and something to keep in mind for all of us, teenagers and adults. Thank you so much for listening to Raising Me. I'm Adrienne Stein. This episode is edited by Megan Littlefield and produced with Nate Eldridge. Please follow Raising Me wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, if you share this episode, we'd really appreciate that. It helps others find the message. Wherever you are, I hope you learned something new and get to take a little time for you.